was born in New Zealand 85 years ago in a little village 100 miles south of here called Woodville. Went to primary school there, then to New Plymouth, which you possibly have heard of over on the west coast, and in 1945 I went to England in the Royal New Zealand Navy, hoping to become a pilot, but the war ended, so missed that. So when the war in Korea started, down to the drill hall in Auckland, and along with thousands of others joined up, went into camp on the 29th of August, and then trained, went to OC2, Officer Cadet Training Unit, and then from here, from New Zealand, we left on the 10th of December, I think it was, for Korea. Went over to Brisbane, called in there, had a wonderful day there, and then to Manila, and we arrived over in Korea on the last day of 1950, 31st of January 1950. I think the temperature was somewhere about 20 degrees below zero. Colder than I've ever been. So we went forward with the troops, and we were in the British, Australian, New Zealand, Canadian. We were in independent brigades, which is an army unit, and then we were all involved at Kapyong, which there's been now plenty of stories written about, and then moved forward, and I was lucky enough to be the first British Commonwealth officer to go over the 38th parallel. Essentially, we stayed across the 38th parallel, and you probably now know the demarcation zone right across the Korean peninsula. It was a bit boring at times. In fact, a famous general once said, "War is long periods of intense boredom and short periods of intense excitement," and it's dead right. I was very lucky. I stayed over there until 1954, which of course was after the ceasefire on the 25th of August, and stayed on over there, and came back home here in June 1954. Altogether, I had a very good, and I was very lucky with the time I had there, served with some wonderful units. From Korea, I used to send them over to a girl that was a pen friend. You know what a pen friend is? And she worked in Rochester, which is where the Kodak factory is in America. So I sent them to her, and she would take them to the factory, get them processed, and put in the mounts, and then send them back to Korea.
brothers, John and Bob, came from a little town called Utiku, which is in the middle of the North Island. In 1949, they both joined the Navy because they wanted to see the world. John was 19 and a half, Bob was 17 and a half. I had just left school and had joined the post office. In 1950, the Korean War broke out, and both brothers signed up for service in Korea. John went on away in July 1951, July 1950 on the Her Majesty New Zealand ship Tutira. Bob followed in October of 1950 on the Rotowiti, and they both met up in Sasebo in Japan. John returned on the Tutira in November 1951, and Bob commenced his journey on the Rotowiti, patrolling the northwest coast of Korea. Bob, unfortunately, was killed in action off the coast of North Korea, 26th of August 1951. Bob joined the commandos. He was Navy commandos, and they sent a raiding party ashore to investigate a gun emplacement that they had seen out to sea earlier in the month. To reach this little village where the gun emplacement was, they had to scale a cliff, and consequently, I think there was about 12 or 14 of them. Unfortunately, and this took place in the early hours of the 26th of August, 1 a.m. After they scaled the cliffs and approached the gun emplacement, they were challenged by a North Korean sentry. Unfortunately, Bob stood up to throw a hand grenade and was immediately machine gunned. By that time, the Koreans were well aware and started firing back. So the commandos then decided that best was to retreat back to the ship, pursued by the North Koreans. Norm Scholes, who was a great friend and a shipmate of my brother, carried my brother to the cliff, top of the cliff, but was unable to carry him down. He literally threw my brother down, as he said to us later on that my brother was already dead. He carried him with the assistance of some of the other sailors as far as along the beach they could, but as they were being closely pursued by the North Koreans, they had to leave him behind some rocks and get back to the ship. The idea was, by leaving him there and covering him with some small rocks, that they hoped to be able to return the next day and retrieve the body. But the captain was in favour of doing this, but he was overruled by the admiral, and consequently it was too big of a risk for the ship to return to rescue the body. After this time, we know roughly where he was killed on this point, Sogon-nai, North Korea.
Well, Bob, he was with a landing party, and he was killed that night. It was a night attack, and one of the chaps, Norm Scholes, was carrying him back, but they were told to leave him there, otherwise there'd be a lot more killed. So. Well, he's still there to this day. No one knows where he is buried or what happened to him. They left him in the rocks on the beach at Saigon Knee. Well, Bob was same age as me, 19, young fella, good sportsman. We used to spar together, boxing and that sort of thing.
I have had the pleasure of being visit to Korea from the Republic of Korea to visit the War Memorial at Seoul, and also the United Nations Cemetery at Busan, where a plaque is placed in memory of the brother, and also, as I said, at the War Museum in Seoul. And it gave me great honour to be there, to be able to read the inscription and to pay respect to our late brother. For many years, my parents endeavoured to find out from the government just what took place, but owing to the Secrecy Act at that time, very little information was given out. It wasn't until early 1990s, and after several letters that I'd written to the Ministry of Affairs, that we began to receive some information that greatly helped ourselves, and by this time, unfortunately, my mother and father had passed away. But it did happen, it did help to give us some closure on our brother's death.
I'll come here maybe about 15 years' time. This being a military cemetery, you don't do anything yourself. It's all done according to a pattern laid down by the Ministry of Veterans Affairs. So everything, you'll see all the plaques are the same, and you can put your own bowl of flowers or whatever beside the plaque, but nothing beyond that. Try to get up twice a year, because not having a car, it's a bit far to walk. So when I borrow my sister's car, then I can come up here.
We're not shopping in town.
And then we gave the Maori concert party the chili sherry. When they drank one, whoa, they
He and I are friends now, but we weren't. And in Korea, he was my chief executive officer. He and I worked at the forward observation post. That's how I knew him. He was the troop commander of my troop. A very good officer.
I'd had her since I was at high school in New Plymouth. Well, in the 50s, flying was not exactly the easiest way to travel. I spoke to her on the phone a couple of times, but no, we never met, because the first time I went to the States was only in probably about 1988, when I went over there with my wife. It's a new country. I had the opportunity, and I thought it might be interesting, you know, when the war was over, to be able to look back and just sort of recount to my various friends what it was all about in terms of where we were, what we were doing, and so on. Okay, we were obviously firing guns, but you know, there are a lot of different places recorded one way and another at that time. I was an architect. I was when I went to Korea, I left university to join up, and when I came back, I went back to university in 1955 and finished my degree, and took another one, and then I came back down to Hawke's Bay here, and I worked in Hastings, which is just 23 k's away, and worked over there for a few years. Then came over to Napier and worked for a year here, and then by then had a wife, 3 children, and went over to Fiji. My wife was over there, she was only a girlfriend at that stage, so I went over to Fiji to see her, and I got a job while I was over there, and I was still on army pay, so I was getting my army pay, which was pretty good for those days, and also I had a job in Suva, so I was getting double money, and I was making plenty of money. I think we helped the Korean people to be able to get control of their own country, whatever the difficulties may be politically, but I'm not ashamed of anything that we did there. I find it a pity that we didn't know more about Korea and the people before and while we were there. I get up at 7:30 and have breakfast, which is brought to me on a tray, and then after breakfast, because I have quite a good breakfast, you know, have porridge and some fruit and toast and marmalade. And then it depends on if there's anything been organised that I can go to. Otherwise, I just mess around the flat here, and I have a sleep after lunch for an hour and a half, and then I have a read from about 2:30 through till about 8 o'clock at night. We get our meals. We have a morning and afternoon tea, which is brought to our rooms. Our midday meal and the evening meal we have in the dining room here, brought to us by the waitresses, and well, depending on whether there's anything on it, go and see or movie or anything like that. Yes, Barbara, she's nearly been down, dead now for nearly 10 years. It was on the 5th of March in 2008. Well, as far as I'm concerned, thank you very much for this, and we can go whenever you're ready, doing whatever you're taking.
Are you happy here today?
Yeah. I think it's a very pleasant layout of this place. I really do.
Can you say, Barbara, bye, see you soon, like that?
Yes. You're dead right. Anyway. It was a very good friend of mine. That one, he died about 2 years ago. And there was a Brit Major, and I think he was a Canadian, I'm not sure. And myself, he was my boss.
Yes.
Big, totally idle sod.